So today we're going to look at multiplying complex numbers. This follows a lot of the same rules as normal multiplication for algebra, but there's a few little tips that we need to go over. So we'll start by just looking at a few examples of multiplication involving complex numbers. So the first example we'll look at here, we're going to multiply a real number 2 by a complex number 3 minus 4i. Now, just like in any example where you have a bracket with two terms in it and one term outside the bracket, what we're going to do is multiply the outside term by the first term and then the second term. So 2 times 3 is 6. Then when we multiply the second term, 2 times minus 4i, that will give us minus 8i. The rules here again are largely the same as algebra. When you're multiplying a real number by an imaginary number, you multiply the number by the number, and then any letter would be multiplied by the other letter. At this point now, we just have one complex number as our answer, so we can say that's solved. So now we'll look at an example where we're multiplying I by a complex number. This will be the same process we're going to use as if we multiply any imaginary number, so it could be 2i or 3i or 6i. We're just going to use I here to make things simpler. So again, the method is very much the same as the last example we used. We're going to multiply the outside term by the two inside terms. So I multiplied by minus 2 is going to be minus 2i, just like with algebra. I multiplied by minus 6i is going to give us minus 6, but the I by I is going to give us I squared. Now, the fact that we've got an I squared here is actually really important. If you remember back to when we were looking at the different powers of I, we said that I by itself is the square root of minus 1. And we said therefore that I squared would be the square root of minus 1 squared. Now a square root and a square cancel out, so we know that I squared is just the same as minus 1. And we mentioned at the time that would be important to remember, and this is why. So once we've got this multiplied out, we need to recognize that I squared is just minus 1. So we're going to rewrite this last line, but we're going to sub in minus 1 for I squared. So I've underlined that in red, so you can see that I squared has been subbed in, and we put in minus 1 instead. Now we're going to simplify this a little bit more to get rid of this bracket. So minus 6 times minus 1. 6 times 1 is 6, and a minus times a minus gives us a plus. So we end up with minus 2i plus 6. Now this is a complex number because it's got an imaginary part and a real part. So normally we just write a complex number with the real part first. So we'll do that now. So we have a real number 6 and our imaginary number minus 2i. At this point now, that question is done. So you've simplified that as much as you can down to just one complex number. So the final example we'll look at now is one where we're multiplying two complex numbers by each other. So we have 4 minus 3i and we have 6 plus 2i. Four minus 3i is a complex number because it's got a real and imaginary part. And 6 plus 2i is a complex number because it has a real part and an imaginary part. So just like with algebra, where we have two brackets that have two terms inside each of them, we're going to split up the first bracket and multiply each half of this by the second bracket. So the method here will look very familiar. The only thing you really need to watch out for is when you multiply an I term by an I term, you're going to end up with an I squared. So just follow along. I'm going to try and highlight things in the correct color as we go through. So we're going to split up the first bracket into 4 and minus 3i. We're going to multiply 4 by the second bracket. 6 plus 2i. We're going to multiply minus 3i by the second bracket. 6 plus 2i. So again, we're getting the 4 from the first bracket, we're getting the minus 3i from the first bracket, and the second bracket we're just writing it twice. Now when we're multiplying our brackets out, we're going to multiply the outside term by the two inside terms. So 4 by 6 and 4 by 2i, and minus 3i by 6, minus 3i by 2i. Again, we know that this one here is going to be the most tricky, because multiplying an I by an I will give us an I squared. So we have to remember how to deal with that. So let's just start from the left hand side. 4 times 6 is 24. 4 times 2i is going to give us 8i. So just multiply the normal part of the number by the normal part there. Minus 3i by 6. Well, 3 times 6 is going to be 18. Again, the normal part gets multiplied by the normal part. And then a minus times a plus will give us a minus. Then minus 3i times plus 2i is going to be the tricky part. So a minus times a plus will give us a minus. 3 times 2 will give us 6. And I times I is going to give us I squared. Now, like we saw in the last example, I squared simplifies to being minus 1. So we just need to keep that in our heads. So our first step, we'll just simplify that part out. When we multiply it out, the 6 times minus 1 is going to give us plus 6, because a minus times a minus gives us a plus. So then we're left with 24 plus 8i minus 18i. Now, we know that what we need to do is group like terms and then simplify them, just like when we dealt with addition and subtraction before. So our like terms here is going to be 24 and 6, which are our real numbers, and 8i and minus 18i, which are our imaginary numbers. So we'll group them together, 24 plus 6, and then 8i minus 18i. Now that they're grouped together, we'll simplify them. So 24 plus 6 gives us 30, and 8i minus 18i is going to give us minus 10i. At this point now, we've simplified the whole thing down to being one complex number, so we could be happy enough that our work is done in simplifying this.